I can't remember what made me draw. I think I've always remembered drawing. I can remember doing a watercolour. I know where I did it. I must have been shortly out of kindergarten. So obviously I've always wanted to make marks. And that's really what it's about, isn't it? I mean, drawing is about making marks. And I've said probably before many times that I think making marks is a primal urge. It's something that people have wanted to do ever since some idiot picked up a burnt stick from a fire and made a mark on a cave wall. The trouble is that he went on from there, and some other idiot said, hey mate, you know, if you put a couple of ears and a tail on that, it'll look like those animals out there that you keep chasing every day. And that's where people began then to start looking at the landscape and making marks which defined their position within the world. But the original idea of making a mark is such a primal thing, and it's both abstract and human at the same time. It's just a need that everybody, I think, has always had to make a mark on a flat surface. And I still find it fascinating to have a sheet of paper in front of me and to put a mark on it. And as soon as you put a mark on it, you establish a great pattern of other, or one big pattern of another big negative mark. And then the question is, what do I do on the rest of that space to activate that space and make it look exciting? So you put another mark on, and that makes other shapes, other negative spaces. So what the hell do you put on that to make those spaces activate and look exciting? So it's about that business. It's a game, but it's a fascinating game, and I've always loved it. I'd never been north of Newcastle, so I hadn't seen any really rough country, but New Guinea is a land of jungle. Everything is bigger and better. The growth is bigger. The mountains are higher, the mud is thicker, the bugs are bigger. Everything is on an immense scale. It was just visually overpowering, I suppose. I don't know, I just liked it. I liked the idea of rainforest. I think I fell in love with that. And why is that? I think it's something to do with the lushness of it. And in a funny sort of way, the jungle itself is like a drawing because it's full of texture, full of vertical forms, and full also of linear marks which wind their way through the jungle on all these vines. They look like drawings in 3 dimensions. So, you know, I don't know, one way and another. I mean, I like the rushing streams that you get every now and then, and the whole ambience of the jungle was great. I think I'm very grateful, as I am indeed now, to be able to do something when everybody else is bored out of their minds. You know, most blokes in the army, when they were bored, played cards. Well, I was able to draw them playing cards or doing whatever they were doing. It's enormous benefit. And we found that during the COVID lockdown too, of course. As one artist said to me, you know, artists are always locked down. Because the government, in its wisdom, and I'm very grateful to them, allowed all ex-servicemen and women, if they had started a course and had to terminated because of the war, allowed them to go back to finish their course. And if you hadn't broken a course and you wanted to go to a university or to a course of some sort, you were allowed to do so at the government's expense, as long as the institution wanted to take you. So you had to convince them that you were good enough to be accepted into their institution. So I opted to go to an art school, simple as that.
Did you have to do a test to get in there? Did you have to do a test? Or?
I took in the work I'd done at New Guinea in the army, and they took a look at that and said, yes, you're okay. The only problem I found was that when I did get into tech, the painting course was full, and so I had to go into what they called an illustration course, and I found that very boring and very old-fashioned and dead, and I kept visiting the guys in the painting department, some of whom I already knew, and I thought that was more fun. That's what I wanted to do. It was based on the old European tradition of what an art school should be. There was no discussion of, in the beginning, there was no discussion of what was happening in the rest of the world. There wasn't even a library when I first went there. That started about a year later. So there was little discussion except amongst the students about art with a capital A. There was it was very much a matter of learning how to draw and learning how to paint. And the painting class had about 12 people in it, and most of those were ex-servicemen. And I've probably said this to you before, to my astonishment. I can't remember now ever asking any of these guys where they served or what their experiences were. I think everybody was so damn glad to be out of it and doing what we wanted to do. Everybody was looking forward, not looking backwards. I mean, everybody wanted to go overseas. It was the thing one did. I got a job for 12 months after I left the tech, left the National Art School. Just enough money. I just put enough money aside to pay for a return boat fare. And the object of the idea was to go over for 18 months and come back. Instead of which, of course, we started having a family and came back 8 years later with 2 kids. London in the 1950s was fantastic. It was just after the war. Everything was beginning to work again. All the galleries were opening again. All the artists were beginning to show again. Not only the British artists, but French, German, Italian, American. So the place was buzzing, and everybody was trying to forget the past and once again look to the future. Well, here I was in London, and you were bombarded with ideas, and people were doing most extraordinary things, and I found it tremendously exciting. The first of the American abstract expressionists were showing in London. First show was at the American Embassy, which I saw, and then the next big show was at the Tate, and they were mind blowers, you know, they really great. And for the first time I realised that there were dimensions beyond the sort of painting I'd been doing at East Sydney Tech. I think my mind was liberated, and I found myself doing things that I wouldn't have thought of doing 2 years before. And then we saw this documentary on the BBC. So I wrote to the BBC and said, could I buy some of your photographs, some of the stills, because you must have had a still photographer there as well. And I finally got a call on the phone. I think what had happened was that somebody had received a letter that I sent called, here's a nut, you know, some bloke painting New Guinea in the middle of London, and passed it on to somebody else. They probably passed it on to somebody else, and I finally got a phone call from somebody who said he thought he was interested in what I was doing and thought he might be able to help me. And he introduced himself over the phone, and he said, my name is David Attenborough, and would you like to come round for a drink? So Joe and I went round for a drink. He wouldn't give me any, but he lent them to me. And I did a lot of drawings from his photographs. And that led to a lot of paintings. And the paintings don't seem to have ceased. There are things I can see here now which are about New Guinea and which were done, a few weeks ago or a few months ago. So it's a constant. It keeps recurring. My reading of the attitudes of the South Pacific peoples, who I think have always seen themselves as being part of the land, and the land as being part of them. It's a binding of humanity and the land. And I don't think Europeans have ever really felt like that. I think even our great landscape painters, and there have been some marvellous ones, have always thought of the landscape as being separate from themselves, something to be looked at or admired or used, but not as part of themselves. Nick Waterlow. Nick rang me one day and said he was going to turn on an exhibition of drawing, and he was asking artists to question what drawing was and to extend the idea of drawing, and is there one way of pushing it further? And I thought of several things that I could have done, and I thought, well, hell, why not use my drawing of Icarus, the winged creature? And if I'm going to use a winged creature, then particularly if it's Icarus, the obvious place for Icarus to be is in the sky. So I got out what was then the Yellow Pages, phone book, and looked through page after page looking for somebody who could do sky writing. And I found several people who'd done sky writing and advertising in the sky, and they've finally, after going through about a dozen different people, I found myself talking to a bloke in the Gold Coast who had his own plane, and he'd done a lot of sky writing, apparently. So I explained what I wanted to do, and I sent him lots of drawings. So we all gathered down at Mrs. Macquarie's chair, and at 12 o'clock, nothing happened, and we looked at the sky, and there was nothing there. And about 12, a little white spot appeared in the sky, and you couldn't see the plane, it was just a white spot. And then that white spot suddenly became a body, and suddenly wings appeared on the body, and it was magical. It really was. The drawing was about 3 or 4 kilometres in size. It was just there, and you couldn't see the plane except when it turned and the light flashed on it. So it was quite magical, and I was enormously impressed at him, at his skills, because he explained later that he drew the body first, then he had to add the wings, but you can't fly back and add the wings to what you've already done because you fly through it and disperse it. So he had to fly 300 feet above or below it, and they all matched exactly. It was brilliant, absolutely bloody brilliant. Look, the wingman is a metaphor for leaping into space, of taking risks, of escape. It's all these things, of doing something different. Oscar Wilde wrote a little, small, 2 or 3 line stanza, a poem about it. Never regret thy fall, Icarus of the fearless flight, for the greatest tragedy of all is never to have felt the burning light. And that's what it's about. It's about that burning light. And that's the dumb thing about art. If only one could turn that bloody light off occasionally, but one can't.
Mhm.